Hello guys, this is Real Recaps. In this video, I will talk about a 2024 American crime thriller film, The Silent Hour. Before we start, I hope you will like and subscribe to the channel. The film begins with Detective Frank, a member of the Homicide Division, preparing for his day. He receives a call from his daughter, Sam, who lives with her mother in another city. Sam invites him to visit her for an important event, and Frank promises he will attend. He also mentions that he has a special gift for her but refuses to reveal it yet. After the call, Frank meets with his colleague, Slater, and the two head out to question a person of interest. Slater warns Frank not to act impulsively again, as it could lead them into a difficult situation. They arrive at a port where they plan to interrogate a worker named Jimmy. However, Jimmy is uncooperative and instead pulls a gun, taking a fellow worker hostage. He recklessly opens fire at the officers before fleeing. Frank pursues him through a maze of shipping containers while Jimmy continues to shoot indiscriminately, until he runs out of ammunition. Realizing his situation, Jimmy attempts to flee to the main road, but as he runs across it, a vehicle strikes him, killing him instantly. Frank also collides with the same vehicle, injuring his head and causing blood to flow from his ears. Months later, Frank is shown wearing a hearing aid, having suffered significant damage to his cochlea during the accident, which severely impaired his hearing. While at work, Frank receives a video call from Sam, who is learning sign language for him. She invites him to her recital next week, but Frank refuses, citing his difficulty in handling the noise of large crowds. Sam pleads with him to come, but suddenly, Frank's hearing aid begins to malfunction, causing him to lose his ability to hear her. Frustrated, he hangs up. Frank then visits his doctor for a checkup on his hearing. After running some tests, the doctor informs him that his cochlea has deteriorated even further, reducing his hearing by 80%. She advises him to avoid loud environments as much as possible, warning that he could go permanently deaf if exposed to too much noise. The doctor also suggests Frank start learning sign language, as it may be necessary for communication in the future. Later that day, Frank returns to duty and is assigned to investigate a double homicide involving drug dealers in Hyde Park. The victims were shot at close range, but no one witnessed the crime, and the only evidence is the sound of gunshots. Frank meets the local man who discovered the bodies, but as the man tries to explain what he saw, Frank struggles to hear him. Overwhelmed by the noise from a helicopter, a camera, and a siren, Frank's headache intensifies, and he retreats to his car. The following evening, Frank, feeling down, drinks alone at a bar when Slater joins him. Frank adjusts the volume on his hearing aid to better hear Slater, who has transferred to the narcotics division. Slater tries to comfort Frank, telling him that many officers with disabilities continue to perform well in their roles. Frank, however, feels useless and is considering quitting his job. In an attempt to help, Slater offers Frank a new opportunity. A witness has come forward in the Hyde Park case, but she is deaf, and the official interpreter is unavailable. Slater asks Frank to interpret, though Frank protests that he isn't proficient enough in sign language. Despite Frank's hesitation, Slater insists, and Frank reluctantly agrees. The witness, a 33-year-old woman named Ava, was present when the murders took place but waited 2 days before reporting it to the authorities. The next day, Frank and Slater visit Ava's apartment, which seems to be mostly empty. Ava is preparing to move out as the building's owner has evicted all the residents to convert it into luxury condos. When Frank attempts to communicate with Ava in basic sign language, she becomes frustrated, as she expected a professional interpreter. However, after Frank explains that he is still learning due to his accident, Ava agrees to cooperate. Ava reveals that she had been outside that night to take pictures when she witnessed a group of people fighting and began recording the incident. She shows the video to the officers, which ends with the shooting of 2 individuals. Frank and Slater are shocked by the footage, and Slater takes Ava's phone as evidence, reassuring her that it will be returned soon. Ava expresses fear that the murderers will kill her if they discover she spoke to the police, and Frank promises to protect her. While in the bathroom, Frank notices some medications on the shelf, and after leaving the apartment, Slater mentions that Ava had been to rehab. Frank recalls seeing naloxone, a drug used to treat overdoses, in her bathroom, which leads him to suspect that Ava wasn't out photographing the incident, but instead looking for drugs. As they drive away separately, Frank realizes he left his phone at Ava's apartment and decides to return. Meanwhile, Mason, the leader of the criminals involved in the Hyde Park shooting, arrives at Ava's apartment with his men. They surround the building, and Mason's team breaks into Ava's apartment and takes her hostage. Frank, returning to retrieve his phone, notices a man guarding the door and remains calm as he walks past him. He then sneaks up the emergency staircase and sees Ava being interrogated by Mason. Ava, terrified, writes a note begging them not to hurt her. As Mason prepares to inject Ava, Frank breaks the window and enters, disarming Mason and his henchman, Angel. A shootout erupts, during which Frank accidentally shoots Angel. In the chaos, Frank and Ava manage to flee, but Mason orders his men to search the building and ensure that the two do not escape. Frank and Ava hide in an empty apartment, and Ava questions why the criminals only came after she reported the video to the police. Frank deduces that there must be a mole within the police force. He also accuses Ava of going out that night to buy drugs, though she denies it. Ava explains that she was celebrating an offer to exhibit her photographs, not looking for drugs. She admits to waiting 2 days to report the incident because one of the victims was her former drug dealer. Later, Frank leaves to find a way to call the police, and while he is gone, Ava tries to signal for help, but no one notices. She sees a police car and initially believes rescue has arrived, but soon realizes the officers are working with the criminals. Meanwhile, Mason and his team prepare to stop Frank from calling for help. When they find Frank's phone, they realize he might be trying to contact the authorities. Mason orders his men and the corrupt officers to search the building for Frank and Ava, intercepting any 911 calls to prevent them from reaching the real police. Frank returning to Ava's apartment empty-handed after his unsuccessful attempt to find a phone. Ava informs him that some police officers are working with the gangsters. Frank, stunned by this revelation, realizes that Mason is a corrupt cop who is deeply involved with the drug dealers, meaning that every move Frank makes could be anticipated by Mason's team. Despite feeling desperate, Frank quickly forms a plan and rushes toward the elevator. Meanwhile, the villains, monitoring the CCTV footage, spot Frank and Ava on the 6th floor. The pair had been searching for the emergency intercom in the elevator, and Frank desperately tries to call for help, requesting that someone contact Detective Slater, the only person he trusts. Unfortunately, the response is only an automated message. They attempt to leave the elevator, but they are attacked by the corrupt officers, forcing them to retreat back inside. Mason receives information about Frank's location and heads toward the elevator, leaving Ava's apartment unguarded. Seizing the opportunity, Frank quickly disables the CCTV and presses several buttons in the elevator, hoping to confuse the gangsters. They manage to escape and reach Ava's apartment on the 10th floor, where they find Angel being treated by a medic. The medic refuses to assist, claiming it's beyond her responsibility, while Angel contacts Mason for help. However, Ava knocks him out, and they take Angel's phone, fleeing to another room. When Mason discovers that Ava's phone is missing, he becomes furious and tries to make a call, but Ava silently disables the phone. Frank texts Slater, asking him to call the number, but Frank accidentally steps on a plastic object, alerting Mason to their location. They flee once again, escaping through the window into a stairwell and then into another apartment to hide. At this point, they receive a video call from Slater, but Frank's hearing aid is completely dead, and he can no longer hear. Ava helps by reading Slater's lips as Frank explains their dire situation. Slater promises to come with backup. However, just as they finish the call, Mason and his men find their location and attack again. The duo opens the window and sneaks into another room. During their escape, Ava pauses and asks Frank how the gangsters knew their whereabouts. Frank realizes they've been tracked through Angel's phone. He quickly wraps the phone in Ava's shirt and throws it downstairs, leading the gangsters to rush downstairs in pursuit of the decoy. As Mason's patience wears thin, he orders a full search of the building, determined to end the chase once and for all. Meanwhile, Frank and Ava find a hiding spot, but soon realize that Slater has arrived alone, without reinforcements. Concerned for his friend, Frank decides to help. In the lobby, they discover Slater being held at gunpoint by one of the gangsters. Frank is forced to surrender his weapon, only for Slater to pick it up and point it at him. In a shocking twist, it is revealed that Slater is part of the corrupt gang, the mole Frank had suspected in the police force. Slater expresses his annoyance at Frank's return and attempts to act as a hero. Mason and his men then inject Ava with drugs, intending to overdose her and make it appear as a self-delete. Slater tries to bribe Frank, asking him to join the gang and remain silent. Reluctantly, Frank agrees, as he feels he has no other choice. The villains are pleased, and they leave Ava's unconscious body in her room while taking Frank with them. However, once inside the elevator, Frank devises a plan. He grabs a cop's gun and locks the elevator door, trapping the villains inside. He rushes back to Ava's room, where he uses naloxone, which he found earlier, to revive her. Ava awakens but warns Frank that the effects of naloxone are temporary, and she will lose consciousness again soon. Mason orders his men to surround the building, searching every corner. Frank hands Ava a gun and tells her to shoot anyone who enters the window while he pours petrol all over the room. He quickly lights a fire, and thick smoke starts to rise, attracting the attention of people outside. Soon, emergency vehicles arrive, forcing the gangsters to abandon their mission. Meanwhile, Mason enters the apartment through a window, determined to find Frank and Ava. However, the duo douses him with acetone, causing him to scream in pain while they escape. Mason refuses to give up, demanding that Slater help him track them down. The pair continues to run, eventually finding themselves in a musician's apartment, where they discover a music studio. Mason and Slater enter the apartment, but Mason is still suffering from the effects of the acetone. When Slater enters a room, Ava and Frank blast ear-piercing metal music, causing Slater's eardrums to burst. He stumbles out of the room, only to be shot by Mason, who is still blinded by the pain in his eyes. Realizing his mistake, Mason becomes frustrated and leaves the apartment. Slater dies, and Ava's naloxone wears off, causing her to fall unconscious again. Frank tries to revive her but hears someone approaching, forcing them to hide. Mason arrives and is shocked to find Ava unconscious. Frank, however, sneaks up behind Mason and knocks him out with a guitar. He then carries Ava and rushes out of the building, which is now engulfed in flames. Frank hands Ava's unconscious body to the emergency medical team, and they begin to resuscitate her while Frank watches in concern. The scene shifts to the future, where Frank attends his daughter's recital. Before the movie ends, Ava joins him and sits beside him, taking his hand. She survived the ordeal, and the two now appear to be in a relationship. The end. Thanks for watching.